Clay Daniel. I have worked with LSAT students for 20 years now, and I've seen a lot of changes in the LSAT over that time. The latest one to come is in summer 2024 when the logic games, which is the colloquial name for the analytical reasoning, will be no more. In its place, we will see a second logical reasoning section. And so the logical reasoning will now account for approximately 2/3 of the LSAT score, which is the higher percentage than it ever has, at least during my time of working on the LSAT. And so what I want to do here is give you a primer on logical reasoning by showing you a sample argument, how to read that argument, and then we'll show you how to apply such an argument to the 4 most common logical reasoning question types: necessary assumption, flaw, weaken, and inference. We'll see how the same argument can be used to be applied in all of these different content areas, these different question types. What this shows is how important it is to read the argument well and to be flexible in your thinking. But it also demonstrates the importance of reading the question stem carefully and knowing what your task is. Those two aspects together make up the core strategy for logical reasoning, at least until you get to the answer choices, in which case some other principles apply as well, and I'll be covering those. So let's start with the argument itself. As you can see here, I've done some highlighting already in colors that correspond to the highlighting colors that are available on the digital LSAT. Let's take a look at this argument, which we have written to mirror the kind of argument you will see on the LSAT. In response to a prolonged recession in country X, the government instituted a series of stimulus programs infusing large amounts of money into country X's economy. In the 6 months following each delivery of stimulus, the recession trend either slowed or reversed. Clearly, the government stimulus program yielded a positive effect on country X's economy. Now, you may have heard that arguments on the LSAT are made up of conclusions and premises. The central claim, the claim that the author is seeking to establish, and the supporting evidence that the author believes in fact establishes or proves that claim. It's important to read LSAT arguments well, carefully, but the best way to read them is to think of it more as kind of like a seek and destroy mission, that you're going for something in particular. You're zooming in until you find the conclusion, and then you're kind of zooming back out to establish what the supporting premises are. You can think of it kind of like a bullseye. The center of the bullseye is the conclusion. Closest to the conclusion, usually, in proximity, is the most important premise. There might be another premise a little further away, and sometimes there's background information, which is often in the opening sentence, though not always. That trend tends to hold, though, with everything on the LSAT. Like everything on the LSAT, there are exceptions. More challenging arguments sometimes have a different order of things, or you might have to zoom out a little bit more to get everything. But I've highlighted in orange here the conclusion indicator. The conclusion here comes at the end of the argument, which is the most common place for it, although it's definitely not the only place for it. It can be at the beginning or in the middle. You can see from the word clearly that indicates the conclusion. You'll also note that this last sentence is a claim, an explanation of something that took place. What took place is not in doubt, as we'll see in a moment. But why it took place, that is up for debate. That is the question that the argument is essentially posing for us. I've highlighted in yellow some key terms that really just set up what's happening here, that we have a recession going on. Stimulus programs are the response. There's a time element to following each delivery of stimulus. There's a close association, we might say correlation here, And then in pink, we see really what is the main bit of evidence that the author wants to put forward. Closely associated in time with the stimulus, the infusion of cash, each time there was a slowing or reversal of the recession. There was an economic recovery. So to read this argument well, we identify that conclusion first, we zoom out and see what the supporting evidence is like. And then, if we are dealing with a critical argument question, which we'll see 3 times in exploring this particular argument, we want to be asking, what if? Wait a minute, author, what if blank? How might I object to this argument in a way that kind of pokes holes in it or suggests alternate possibilities or factors that the author is perhaps not thinking about? One thing that will help you coming up with that what if is a recognition of the most common types of flaws and logical fallacies that appear on the LSAT. And one of the single most common is the idea of correlation versus causation. You may have learned about that in a statistics class or somewhere else, but simply because 2 factors are closely associated or correlated does not mean that one must have caused the other. So we want to be thinking along those lines here because they have made a close association between something that the government did and an economic phenomenon that happened at the same time. But is there a causal relationship? Do we know that it was actually the stimulus programs, the infusion of cash into the economy that caused these recoveries? To put it another way, what if something else was involved? What if something else took place at around the same time that could explain why the economy recovered? So that's how we read the argument and kind of throw darts at it, so to speak. Try to poke holes in it in order to understand what's necessary as we approach critical argument questions. Now, we'll also see an inference question at the end, and I'll explain how that's different. But at this point, we have set the foundation for answering the question, for really evaluating the answer choices, because we understand the argument well.